Welcome. This lecture we're going to talk about fertilization and pregnancy. Most vertebrates have paired gonads, so they'll have testes in males and ovaries in females, with accessory structures used for reproduction. While hermaphroditism is not common, here you can see a hermaphroditic wood rat with complete sets of ovaries and the oviduct here, and testicles here. So this is a really great comparison that you can see these side by side in the same animal. This is actually the bladder right here. Again, this is anomalous, not the norm, but a great way to show the comparison. The female reproductive tract consists of the ovaries, which are up here, and this is where the eggs are produced. The oviduct, which is going to convey the egg from the ovaries to the uterus. The uterus, where if fertilized, the egg will develop into an embryo. The cervix down here, and then the vagina, which is going to convey the sperm into the reproductive tract. Ovaries contain oocytes, and these are cells that will develop into eggs, and they are surrounded by follicle cells. And you can see them being developed here, the oocytes surrounded by the follicle cells, and as they mature. Most female animals are born with all the oocytes they will have for their entire life. You've often heard that you're born with all of your eggs. You're not actually born with all your eggs because your eggs develop each month, but you're born with all of the oocytes, the cells that will develop into eggs. Therefore, the number of potential offsprings is dictated at birth. However, not all eggs will be fertilized, so the number of offspring is often less than the number of oocytes. The follicle cells are going to support the oocytes with nutrition and hormones while the egg develops. During ovulation, the oocyte and follicle cells grow until the follicles ripen and open, expelling the egg. And you can see that as you get to this end of the ovary here. The production of the egg is called oogenesis, and the oocyte will remain small in viviparous animals and enlarge in oviparous animals. In some animals, the follicle cells will regress, but in mammals, the follicle cells will remain and become the corpus luteum that you can see here. The corpus luteum will continue to release hormones to support the egg and its development. Some animals only produce a few eggs each breeding season, while others, like amphibians and fish, will mature thousands of oocytes. This is dictated by the type of reproductive strategy the animal employs, whether they're K or R selected. Gonadotropins are used to regulate ovulation in mammals, and they are released from several different glands. The pituitary gland and the hypothalamus in the brain, and the ovaries and uterus in the abdomen all release hormones to control each stage of ovulation and pregnancy. You can see these glands here. You have glands in your uterus, in your ovaries, and in the brain. You have the pituitary gland here and the hypothalamus here. And there, we're going to talk about this feedback loop where the hypothalamus is going to release a hormone that's going to trigger the pituitary gland to release a hormone, and then that will trigger that corpus luteum in the ovaries to also release hormones. And what happens with that corpus luteum and the egg will then send information back to the hypothalamus and back to the anterior pituitary on what should happen next. The first stage in the menstrual cycle is called the follicular phase. This is generally day 1 through 14, of the menstrual cycle, and this is before ovulation occurs. Ovulation is when the egg is expelled from the ovary. During this follicular phase is where oogenesis is occurring in the ovary. During this first stage, the hypothalamus is going to release gonadotropin releasing hormone. Here's the hypothalamus, here's the gonadotropin releasing hormone. And that is going to target the pituitary gland right here. And the pituitary gland will release luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Here's your luteinizing hormone, your follicle stimulating hormone. And the release of these two hormones, again, is triggered by that gonadotropin releasing hormone released from the hypothalamus. The gonadotropin releasing hormone, we also write it as this GnRH, is regulated by many environmental and physiological factors. But in humans, it's released in steady pulses during this follicular stage. Just prior to ovulation, blood concentrations of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone are going to spike, stimulating estrogen to be released from the follicle cells. So we're right about here on this schedule. And then we look at this graph here. We have pretty low levels or steady levels of estrogen and progesterone. Luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone are being released. And then right before ovulation, you see a spike in those, and that is going to stimulate estrogen from being released from the follicle cells. This increase in estrogen will feed back to the hypothalamus, stimulating more gonadotropin releasing hormone, which will then in turn increase the release of the luteinizing hormone from the pituitary gland. The surge of luteinizing hormone will stimulate ovulation. And we can see that here on this graph, we have pretty consistent levels of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Those are going to surge, and then those are going to stimulate more estrogen being released, which will then trigger ovulation. Once the egg is released from the ovary, you enter the second stage, the luteal stage of the menstrual cycle. And so you can see that here is that ovary being released from here's the egg being released from the ovary, and then those follicle cells are going to turn into that corpus luteum. And here we are on this time frame, we've entered this luteal phase. And during this luteal phase, the corpus luteum is going to release progesterone, which along with estrogen is going to signal the pituitary to reduce the release of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. We can see that here when we have more estrogen and progesterone being released from the corpus luteum, that is going to send feedback, negative feedback, back up to the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary to stop releasing the gonadotropin releasing hormone and the luteinizing hormone. Progesterone stimulates growth of the uterine lining to prepare it for pregnancy in this luteal phase. The endometrium is the uterine lining, and this is going to thicken, and blood vessels are going to develop to support implantation should the egg be fertilized. If the egg is not fertilized, the corpus luteum will regress and discontinue its release of progesterone. The reduced concentration of blood progesterone and estrogen will allow the hypothalamus to begin releasing more gonadotropin releasing hormone, which will then stimulate the release of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone from the pituitary gland, starting the cycle all over again. In mammals that menstruate, the reduction of hormones from the corpus luteum will also cease the support of the endometrial lining, the endometrium, and cause menstruation. So we are here on our cycle where the drop in estrogen and progesterone, if the egg is not fertilized, will cause the female to shed that endometrial lining. Remember that all of these hormones are moving through the bloodstream. So when we talked about the nervous system and we talked about how it's a very rapid and direct communication, this is also a form of communication. But remember, this is a 28-day cycle, so it's a much slower form of communication. If the egg is fertilized, pregnancy will begin. The egg must be fertilized by a sperm cell. Some animals are going to produce sperm continuously, while others are going to have discrete seasons of spermatogenesis, which is the production of sperm. Some animals will undergo testicular regression when females are not in estrus, and this will reduce the energetic demand of thermoregulation and spermatogenesis in the testicles. Like the ovaries, the testes are also part of the endocrine system, releasing hormones to support spermatogenesis. Mammalian males, like the females, also rely on the pituitary gland for hormonal secretion. The development of sperm is going to begin in the seminiferous tubules in the testes. Here you can see the testicle of a male, and inside that testicle are these seminiferous tubules. If you looked inside one of those tubules, here's a cross section here, you have a few different types of cells that we'll talk about. The Leydig cells, the Sertoli cells, and all of these are going to help support spermatogenesis. These cells in and around the seminiferous tubules are going to provide hormones and nutrition for sperm development. Spermatocytes in the seminiferous tubules mature into sperm with the support of the Sertoli and the Leydig cells. As in females, gonadotropins released from the pituitary gland target the Sertoli and Leydig cells to stimulate growth and testosterone production. And as we saw in females, gonadotropin release can be regulated in seasonal breeders. These hormones will be released in steady pulses in year-round animals for animals without defined breeding seasons. Follicle-stimulating hormone is going to stimulate the Sertoli cells to nutritionally support growing sperm cells or spermatogenesis from the spermatocytes. And you can see that here, these Sertoli cells and is going to support these spermatocytes to produce new sperm cells. Luteinizing hormone stimulates the Leydig cells to release testosterone. The testosterone also helps the Sertoli cells. Testosterone has many systemic effects on the body and its development, and once sperm cells develop in the seminiferous tubules, then they are going to travel through a continuous track where they are stored in the epididymis. The epididymis is this storage tract that surrounds the testicle. Sperm must be released from the penis for fertilization to occur in mammals. This process of ejaculation occurs through the release of composite of fluids released from several glands along the reproductive tract. The bulbourethral gland is going to release a pre-ejaculatory fluid that will neutralize any acidic urine remaining in the urethra. That gland is right at the base of the penis here. There are other glands, the seminal vesicle here and the prostate gland over here, release fluids to help provide nutrients to the sperm and fluid to help convey the sperm to the egg. Altogether, these fluids, along with the sperm, make up the semen. Once the sperm reach the egg, fertilization can begin. Hundreds to millions of sperm can be released, but only one will fertilize the egg. In mammals, fertilization occurs in the oviduct, and the fertilized egg will travel to the uterus for implantation. The egg is surrounded by a few protective layers that the sperm need to penetrate. The outermost layer is the granulose cells that many sperm will digest. That is depicted over here, where there is this cloud of granulosa cells surrounding that oocyte. The sperm have enzymes that help forge a path through these layers. Those enzymes are located in the acrosome, which is right here at the head of the sperm. These enzymes are going to help it to breach the next layer, the zona pellucida, and only one sperm is going to be able to get through the zona pellucida. Once a sperm breaches the zona pellucida, it will bind to the cell membrane of the oocyte. Very few sperm will make it to this point, and only one sperm will fuse to the membrane of the cell and empty its cytoplasm into the oocyte. A reaction occurs within the egg, preventing another sperm from being able to fuse with the cell membrane. This egg is now fertilized, and we call it a zygote. While the zygote is traveling down in the oviduct to the uterus, cells begin dividing through mitosis and become a blastocyst. You can see that here the sperm and the egg are going to fuse. Here's your zygote, the fertilized egg, and then it begins to divide and becomes this blastocyst, which is kind of just a ball of cells. Progesterone from the corpus luteum is important for the blastocyst to be able to travel down the oviduct and eventually implant into the endometrium. The endometrium supports the blastocyst until the placenta is developed. Eventually, the placenta will take over in hormonal and nutritional support of the growing embryo or fetus. Once the zygote divides and becomes an embryo, cell division is going to be pretty rapid. And so you have this very early stage here where it's still just kind of a ball of cells, but it's going to start to invaginate on itself or fold in on itself. At this stage, the cell's main role is to keep making new cells, and they don't make much proteins or grow very much. The cytoplasm partitions into other cells, so while the amount of cells are increasing, the size is not growing very much. But after many cycles of cell division, the cells form an opening and start to reorganize their location. So this is what we were talking about, where they start to fold in on themselves. And this is called gastrulation. This is the beginning of the 3 layers of cell development. You have the ectoderm, which will become the outside, the skin, and the nervous system of the animal. The endoderm, which is down in here. Again, the endoderm here forms the digestive tract. And then the mesoderm, this middle layer here, is going to form the organs and the muscles. Cells differentiate and development continues, and once recognizable features are developed, the embryo becomes a fetus. This is about week 9 in humans, which would be about 11 to 12 weeks gestational age, because pregnancy in humans is calculated from the last menstrual period, which would be about 4 weeks before your first missed period. After full development, the fetus will be born. Birth in viviparous mammals again requires extensive hormonal regulation to prepare the mother for the process. Estrogen is vitally important in preparing the muscles for contractions and the muscle receptors for oxytocin, which is another hormone. Oxytocin is released from the pituitary gland and regulates the birth process, as well as milk release from the mammary glands. The muscles surrounding the uterus communicate with gap junctions, like we discussed in heart muscles, so that contractions can occur simultaneously. These muscle contractions force the fetus towards the cervix, which stimulates mechanoreceptors that transmit action potentials to the central nervous system, stimulating more oxytocin release. Wow, if this isn't really putting together everything we've learned so far. More oxytocin release increases the contraction rate and the dilation of the cervix, allowing the baby to be born, to be passed through the birth canal. Once the placenta is born with the baby, its endocrine functions cease and the blood progesterone and estrogen concentrations will return to normal. Here you can see two animals. This is a pregnant wood rat, and you can see there are 6 fetuses in her uterine horns here. And then here is a pregnant common dolphin with just 1 fetus, but you can see that umbilicus coming out of the fetus there. Only mammals will nurse their young, hence the name mammals, which refers to the mammaries. Lactation is an important stage for mammals to become more independent, while their nutrition is still provided for them. This is extremely energetically demanding, sometimes doubling the mother's metabolic rate. 2 hormones regulate the lactation process. Prolactin from the pituitary gland stimulates milk secretion from the milk ducts, and oxytocin from the pituitary stimulates milk ejection from the mammary glands. Suckling stimulates mechanoreceptors in the nipples, which transmits a signal to the central nervous system, stimulating hormonal release. In many animals, lactation suppresses ovulation and estrus, inhibiting pregnancy, allowing for a break and regulating the pregnancy rate in wild animals. This is not the case for humans. Nursing is not a form of contraception. Oviparity is similar in some ways to viviparity, but also very different. One similarity is the dependence upon the hypothalamus, pituitary, and gonads for hormonal secretions. Fish, amphibian, reptiles, and birds all rely on the hypothalamus, pituitary, gonad hormonal feedback. These animals all rely on luteinizing hormone, estrogen, and testosterone to regulate ovulation and spermatogenesis. In addition to these hormones, these animals rely on unique compounds for different stages of the process. As discussed previously, some of these animals are year-round breeders and cycle on a circadian rhythm, and others are seasonal and generally respond to photoperiod. Seasonal breeders generally regress reproductive structures when not in use. Males will often grow Leydig cells and Sertoli cells seasonally, and they will shrink during the non-breeding season. Females can also experience fluctuations in their ovarian hormones levels as well.